And we'll get to our top story, which is that President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is not ruling out the possibility of a second meeting in 2016 about Russians peddling dirt to the Trump campaign. Honestly, his family should step in.
Throw Grandpa from the train, all right? He needs to go home.
That was a good movie. But
family needs to step in.
Sequel.
Great movie.
Someone needs to step in, or you know what, actually just let it ride.
Remember when Ferris Bueller saved Ferris? I think people need in Washington to start in the Potomac, save Rudy. Somebody close to Rudy needs to just take him home.
If you're interviewing Rudy, you really need to be embarrassed if you don't have a follow-up that makes sense. I've watched a couple of the interviews and it's been painful. I'm sorry. It's pathetic.
I don't know.
At some point, you need to get your self-respect back.
Was actually good. Do you like
really?
Purple? That's all they had. Do you like purple?
I love the laughing nervously, wondering how exactly they can let him get away with it because it's so obviously painful.
Yeah, anyway.
So anyhow, something he raised and denied.
That's a 5-minute wind-up for us now to give you the news. I did 4.5.
Exactly.
All right, let's go.
Numerous television appearances yesterday by Rudy Giuliani. He told the Daily Beast last night that he was heading off a story from the New York Times. Quoting from the report, Giuliani said the journalists included Maggie Haberman, who had reached out to the alleged pre-meeting meeting. Giuliani said he and Trump attorney Jay Sekulow spent a great deal of time on Sunday trying to run the story down. Giuliani said that he believes they managed to, quote, shut it down and help kill the story, yet speculated the journalists had also found other reasons not to run the item. For her part, Maggie Haberman told the Daily Beast, we don't talk about sourcing and wouldn't now, but I have lost the thread of what the former mayor is talking about. Yet in his third and final Fox News interview yesterday,
it was like a trilogy.
Giuliani rambled
like
on and on
Indiana
without
Jones.
much follow-up at all, just wow. And he backed off his flat-out denials that senior Trump aides had discussed the Russians' offer in an earlier meeting.
There wasn't another meeting that has been leaked but hasn't been public yet.
Okay.
That was a meeting, an alleged meeting, 3 days before. According to Cohen, or according to the leak, he says there was a meeting with Donald Jr., with Jared Kushner, with Paul Manafort, with Gates, and possibly two others, in which they, out of the presence of the president, discussed the meeting with the Russians. We checked with their lawyers, the ones we could check with, which were 4 of the 6. That meeting never, ever took place. It didn't happen.
There's no second meeting here.
It's highly unlikely. I always have to leave the option open as a lawyer in case they come across with something that really startles us or fills some of the things that we feel are important.
What's he saying? What's he saying? Well, run that clip again.
Actually, listen to the words.
Again.
Try and listen to exactly what he is saying.
What's he saying here?
Okay, well, we'll hear it. Here, let's look at it again.
Here we go.
Maybe it'll make sense.
There's no second meeting here.
It's highly unlikely. I always have to leave the option open as a lawyer in case they come across with something that really startles us or fills some of the things that we feel are important.
Another round.
Well,
Yeah.
I think Willie can translate.
What a journey.
Is a friend of mine. He gives me my drinks for free.
Rudy Giuliani is debating himself.
Yeah. He is debating.
He's debating himself. So in the morning on CNN, he raised the idea of the second meeting. That came out of the blue to a lot of people. They said, what second meeting? He put that on the table. He says to preempt a New York Times story that we haven't seen yet. And Maggie Haberman says, I don't know what he's talking about. Then, 12 hours later at night on Fox News, he's shooting down the idea that he raised earlier that morning on CNN. It's a debate all in his own
But the
head.
best part is he did it to kill a story that he just single-handedly brought to life.
Yeah.
Right. None of us were talking about that story. He's talking about the story. But again, when he says, well, we shoot it down just in case we don't know about something that they know whether they did it or not, Mike.
Well,
and it's just like Donald Trump lying about adoption, getting everybody together on Air Force One to cover up the real meaning of the Don Jr. meeting, which Don Jr. said his father didn't know about. We got a little perjury issue there if, in fact, we find out that Donald Trump did. All these people that say it's no big deal. If Donald Trump knew about the meeting, it's a big deal for Don Jr. because he committed perjury, if that's the case. But it's just like Trump lying about that meeting means that something went on in that meeting that they wanted to hide. And now you've got Rudy saying, well, but you know, we're not going to say it didn't happen because we don't know if it did or not. Well, yeah, they do know whether it happened or not.
This is both incredibly taxing and incredibly tedious to have this put upon us this early in the day. I mean, he begins one of those segments by talking about a meeting that took place, and in the very same segment, in the very same 30-second clip we played, he goes from there was a meeting that occurred that we wanted to get out to get ahead of the news on it, and 10 seconds later, he's calling it an alleged meeting, as if the meeting that he just referred to didn't take place. I mean, what time of night was he interviewed for that? That's my question.
I don't know. I will
Exactly.
say we have
There's
some
that
of,
question. It's
Yeah.
a good one.
some of the worst VO of Rudy Giuliani I think I've ever seen. We need to get
Actually-
we need some glamours. Look at that. Come on, let's get some
Come
good
on.
shots of the
So
guy.
Heidi Prisbilla-
By the way, what's he doing with his ring? I've seen that now for a couple weeks.
World
where it's
Series
like,
ring?
is that, he's pulling at it or something in the White House.
Heidi, do we need to play it
get some
again?
better-
You have any idea what he was saying? And what would have your follow-up been had you been interviewing him?
Well, actually, I think we could play even more, because not only did he then confirm a meeting that none of us were talking about, but he actually fleshed out some of the details in those meetings, which was that apparently Michael Cohen may have been in Donald Trump's office when Don Jr. came and said, hey, we're about to meet with the Russians. So he seemed to corroborate that.
That's not
and
good, is
he
it?
also put Gates potentially in the pre-planning meeting, which would be huge if true, since, as we all know, Rick Gates, who is Paul Manafort's business partner, has been cooperating with the special counsel for several months, which means that we don't have to rely just on Michael Cohen for this information, that Rick Gates may have confirmed it and Mueller may have known about it for a long time. But the bottom line is that what we're seeing here is that the number of conspiratorial meetings around the Russians is increasing, and so is the circle of Trump officials, Trump campaign officials who participated in these conspiratorial meetings.
Well, at least he has Paul Manafort's innocence.
Well, there's that. The first trial in the special counsel probe kicks off today with jury selection for Paul Manafort.
Right.
The president's former campaign chair is accused of hiding at least $30 million that he made before his days with Trump as an unregistered foreign lobbyist for Ukraine and its former pro-Russian president. We're told the prosecution plans to call 35 witnesses, including agents from the FBI, Treasury Department, and IRS, to show how Manafort allegedly stashed his wealth in overseas banks to avoid paying U.S. taxes. Last week, a member of Robert Mueller's team said he does not anticipate a government witness will, quote, utter the word Russia during the trial. But if Manafort is convicted, the special counsel could use it as leverage for him to talk about anything he knows pertaining to the Trump campaign and Russia. The trial is expected to last about 3 weeks. Manafort also faces a separate trial on similar charges in Washington in September.
So, Richard,
It'll be a long haul for him.
yeah, and the question everybody has is, why is he not pled yet? He seems to have absolutely no defense. They've got him dead to center. And after he goes through this in Virginia, then he'll go through it in D.C.
Short answer is I have no idea. But there's so much apparent evidence against him that either he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, or he's going to have to do some sort of a deal. And again, I don't know I'm not a lawyer, unlike you. I am not a lawyer. What the sequence has to be here, but clearly they've got a lot on Mr. Manafort.
Yeah, clearly they do. And you know, it's interesting. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.